so far succeeding in limiting our access to exercise our constitutional right.
It's not a constitutional right.
Except it is a constitutional right, and I'll get into that. Before I get louder about Crowder, though, I did want to apologize for the length of time it's taken for me to get another video out. I'm also still setting up my studio, so things are going to be a bit echoey. I did want to thank all of you guys for the support you've given to the channel in the last few weeks, and throughout the entire life of it. And let's go ahead and roll the intro before I start getting sentimental. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the fan art. First, we have something I would never do, revoke cookies from Bionic Dance. I literally threw a bag of cookies at her at the Faithless Forum. Then we have an awesome subscribe button from Mumblinbee, which is something you should totally do. I'm getting really close to 20,000, and that's a bit of a milestone I've been looking forward to. And then finally, we have me as Dr. Eggman, straight from the horrible Sonic movie trailer. This one's from Kitty. As always, thank you all for your submissions, and let's get right into the video.
This has been trending for 2 days now. And of course, Georgia and Alabama. There's been so much misinformation out there. Yes. It really has been driving me nuts. And I don't just want to say, oh, it's driving me crazy, it's wrong. I want to let you know as to why it's incorrect. And I want to know what, I guess, intellectual fallacies you've seen most out there.
Well, Crowder, if you're like any of the other Christian conservatives I've dealt with on my channel, you probably won't name any of those fallacies at all. You'll just claim that they exist. I'm sure that's what you're expecting of your audience as well. This is something that I would love for people to start doing. If you're going to call something fallacious, please name the fallacy that your interlocutor is committing, or at the very least be able to explain why it is fallacious and under what concept. Google is a wonderful resource. It can help you.
Here are a couple of claims that I've seen most. One of them, let's go right off the bat. They've been claiming everywhere, by the way. And AOC kind of claimed it, but it was, people said they misinterpreted her tweet. I don't know, I'll give it to her borderline. You don't need AOC on this one because everyone else has been saying that these laws constitute jailing women for murder.
If a Georgia resident plans to travel elsewhere to obtain an abortion, when she comes back, she could face 10 years imprisonment.
Don't you?
Meaning abortion
could how one said 10 and one said 30?
In prison.
Whom are you going to imprison? Every woman who's had a fertilized egg pass through her?
No, you just.
I don't know, Mr. the mechanical engineer guy.
Oh god, really? This shit again? You are aware that engineering is an applied science, correct? And that in his show, he's called Bill Nye the Science Guy, not the Scientist? This is a really weird bit of commentary that I see a lot from conservative Christians. They'll try to undermine someone like Bill Nye, saying that he's just a mechanical engineer, which is, by the way, the genetic fallacy. If Bill Nye made a scientific claim and then you discounted it by saying that he's just a mechanical engineer, you would be committing the genetic fallacy. It's the fallacy of origins, discounting any claim based solely on its origin. If I were to commit the fallacy right now, it would be something like discounting everything Steven Crowder said because he lacks any actual authority as he's just a podcaster. So take it away, Steve the podcaster guy.
That's awesome. But specifically because they've thrown in Georgia and Alabama, but they both specifically criminalize the act of performing the abortion outside of the listed parameters. So
yes, and that means that performing the abortion for a doctor would be a criminal offense. Therefore, getting an abortion from a doctor wouldn't be available. This means that the next logical step, should a woman want to abort and be outside of the allowed parameters, she would then need to perform the abortion herself. This would mean that the criminal offense would now be hers. This seems like pretty simple legal 101.
They very clearly express banning it's the person who's performing the abortion, which brings us actually to their subsequent claim that the Georgia bill, they claim, has loose language that could maybe lead to the prosecution of women who take an abortion pill or who travel to other states or who even miscarry. This is one we've been hearing a lot, miscarriage under these laws.
Yes, that's because the law states that an investigation would have to take place. This is pretty much common practice in any type of criminal offense. A miscarriage would have to be investigated. If somehow it was found out that the mother did something to induce it, whether intent was there or otherwise, this could be classified as a self-induced abortion, which under these bills is a criminal offense. The bill itself is only 10 pages long. I've read over the thing several times, and I will be setting it in the description for you guys to read as well. The Alabama bill is also 10 pages long. They are incredibly short for such sweeping legal documents. By being so short, they open themselves up to being incredibly vague, and this is where we get some of our problems. But I'm gonna hazard a guess that Steven's never going to actually address address anything said in the bill itself.
Stupid is that?
Well, here's the thing, and I've been doing a lot of research since 4 in the morning. There've only been 2 recorded incidents of women being charged with any kind of crime associated with their abortion.
Yeah.
Okay, one was in 1911 and one was in 1922. Throughout unless I'm wrong about this, throughout the entire history of Anglo-American Western law, only one woman was ever charged with the crime of self-abortion. That specific crime, 1599. You have to go back to the 1500s. No woman ever in the history of modern Western law, as far as I know, let me know if I'm wrong, has been charged with a crime for miscarrying.
No, that's because the miscarriage is not the crime. The abortion is the crime. And if the miscarriage has any of the signs that an abortion would have, then the next path to take legally would be the conviction of the woman, even if in reality what happened was in fact a miscarriage. By these definitions, it would be impossible for a miscarriage to be labeled as the actual criminal offense. The self-induced abortion would be labeled as the criminal offense. And oh, by the way, you seem to have not actually done much of your research, because I found several more cases than you found in about 5 minutes of Googling. An Indiana woman, Purvi Patel, took abortion-inducing drugs and was given a 20-year prison sentence for the murder of a child. 2015 also had a Georgia woman, my state, jailed without bond because she ordered pills online to terminate her pregnancy. After a while, she ended up getting a misdemeanor drug charge instead of a murder charge, but this was 4 years ago. As of 2020, the Georgia bill will paint a very different reality. In Indiana, a Chinese immigrant was charged with killing her baby by eating rat poison. She spent 178 days in jail, and she ended up having to cut a deal with prosecutors to drop the murder charge that she had on her in 2013. South Carolina had a migrant worker from Mexico convicted in 2005 for performing an abortion on herself by using abortion-inducing drugs. In Pennsylvania, we have an instance where a mother was given a 1.5 years in prison for ordering abortion drugs for her daughter. Her daughter seemed to want the abortion, and they couldn't actually find any hospital that would perform the procedure, especially due to the fact that they had no insurance to pay for any hospital stays. These people were incredibly poor and had no ability to care for the extra mouth to feed, so they went for the sane option of terminating the pregnancy. There was also the charge of an illegal abortion in 2011 when Jenny McCormack took pills to take care of her pregnancy. Have you noticed a consistent theme here? Note, in some of these cases, the charge did not lead to an extended time in jail or prison. However, Steven Crowder's point is that no women aside from 2 have been charged with this, and I've given you more than 2. I've sufficiently met my burden of proof to undermine his claim. Moving on.
Yeah.
Here's another thing, too, that people have been saying, that it's just right-wing extremism and that it's completely unprecedented. That's actually from Salon. They actually write about how they will try to put you in jail for This is something I think people don't understand. We have pretty liberal laws regarding abortion. The majority of European countries actually have abortion bans after 12 weeks, and a lot of them require a waiting period after consulting with a doctor.
And that actually doesn't support your point. The mere fact that other countries may not necessarily follow suit doesn't mean anything. But by bringing up this point, I can point out that since you think that single-payer healthcare is a bad idea, and most first-world countries besides ours have it, now there's a bit of consistency with your arguments. I know that you didn't bring up the healthcare issue here, but I've seen your stuff. I know your stance on healthcare. Bringing up this point is inconsistent with every point you've ever made about healthcare, which is tangentially related to what we're talking about now.
I don't understand this. I don't understand this, though, either. At least it's intellectually consistent for these people who say abortion, period, on demand, no questions asked, because to me, either it's a tragedy or why should it be rare?
Exactly.
Who cares? Why would you want it to be? Does anyone want pap smears to be rare?
Nope.
No. Does anyone want doctor checkups to be rare? No. Does anyone want people removing swollen tonsils to be rare? No. So I don't. Either it's a tragedy or who cares whether it's rare.
So you mean you're going to ignore all possible nuance here and paint it in a black and white scenario because that's most convenient for your narrative. Either these people don't care about the children, or a child dying is a tragedy. That's the way you're framing this. For someone who literally just talked about intellectual consistency and honesty, I feel like this may be some territory you don't want to walk in, since painting scenarios in black and white for the sake of a narrative is the exact opposite of intellectual honesty and integrity.
So I'm glad that at least right now we're having this conversation openly and honestly. Another claim that this is a big fear-mongering claim from the left, and it's not entirely, by the way, unfounded, that this is going to 100% lead to the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
setting up a potential showdown in the highest court of the land.
Alabama's new abortion law, the strictest in our country, is setting up a direct challenge to Roe versus Wade.
Donald Trump said in the third debate with Hillary Clinton, if I get 2 or more appointments to the Supreme Court, automatically, that's the word he used, automatically Roe v. Wade will be overturned. And I think the president was exactly right. Roe v. Wade
Not according
is
to Kavanaugh.
gone, and every woman in Alabama who gets pregnant is going to be forced to give birth soon.
So you're going to make a point here in a second, but I do want to at least throw out there that you slid in the not according to Kavanaugh. This is because there seems to be this idea that I actually held at one point that Brett Kavanaugh wouldn't be doing anything to overturn Roe v. Wade. This is due to a bit of a misunderstanding on his quotes about the issue. His statements have been that he understands, as a general proposition, the importance of the precedent set forth in Roe v. Wade. One can say they understand the importance of a precedent and still disagree with it and still actively work to undermine it. This quote, and others like it from Brett Kavanaugh, do not necessarily mean that he is going to defend Roe v. Wade.
Okay, so here's the thing. It
Forced.
could.
Oh no.
It could. Some people would like to see it overturned.
Yeah.
Probably a lot in Alabama. Well, we know for a fact, yes, a lot in Alabama. That's a separate issue from the argument. There's a few common misconceptions about Roe v. Wade, and what would happen if it were overturned.
Yeah.
Okay. All states place restrictions, or most states place restrictions, regulations on abortions outside of the federal purview. Texas, they wanted to ban abortion after 20 weeks.
Yeah.
Which Elizabeth Warren famously opposed because she's a moral lady.
I'm not really sure what you said there. It sounds like she's an immoral lady, or she's a moral lady, or I'm not really certain. And because I'm not certain, I can't speak on this point, as much as I really want to.
Everyone has the hill they're willing to die on. What's yours? The hill littered with dead babies. Yeah, it's the dying hill. That's why I thought it was most appropriate. The hill I want to die on is the dying hill.
And I get how that could be funny. I mean, I find dead baby jokes funny. But defending the stance, to be intellectually honest with yourself, you would have to also defend the stance that being pro-United States military also means you're pro-dying on a hill of multiple dead bodies, arguably many more. And if you were to then backpedal from that and say that that's not what that means, then I would say that you're special pleading, where you get to paint a position in nasty rhetoric until it applies to one that you hold.
Colorado, 34 weeks. Virginia, 25 weeks. And these laws often make it, Bill, you probably know about this, Half Asian Bill, they make it to higher courts. Yeah, so there's truth to that.
Yeah, they do. I mean, the case itself allows to have different restrictions based on the trimesters. That was the kind of fundamental, practical application of it. And so we have always, since Roe versus Wade, had limitations. And really, again, I think it goes back to your point, which is where if you really do think it's as easy as clipping a nail and it's as morally irrelevant as clipping a fingernail, then you should just be, you're probably more consistent to just say it should be allowed always.
Right.
And in these other states, essentially to say, that Roe versus Wade may be challenged. Well, Roe versus Wade is a very complex opinion that sets different types of restrictions at different trimesters. And it also has a certain basis in the 14th Amendment, the right to privacy. And so you can maybe parse some of those.
Can you explain that? Because that's something a lot of people don't know. They think that Roe v. Wade says there's a constitutional right to abortion. And they think they're in the Constitution, there's some interpreted right to abortion.
Yeah, it's called liberty in the pursuit of happiness. If having a child, when inconvenient, will infringe on your ability to pursue happiness, then you have the option to engage in behaviors that will allow you to pursue your happiness. These include use of contraceptives, abstinence from sex, and yes, abortion. There are thousands of families below the poverty line in the United States, and one of the incredibly high expenses that is keeping many of those families from being able to break that wage gap is the need to take care of another mouth at the table. Another mouth that comes with hundreds upon thousands of dollars of medical expenses, school expenses, nutritional expenses, and yes, is even taxing on your mental health. If you've been a parent for any amount of time, then you can definitely vouch for the toll it can take on one's mental state. Being forced to go through, at a bare minimum, 18 years of supporting another human being like this is in fact an infringement on one's ability to pursue their own happiness. So it actually is rooted directly there in the very baseline documents of the Constitution. And as with the Constitution, your right to pursue your own happiness and individual liberty stops where someone else's rights begin. As a result, the baby's ability to pursue life, liberty, and happiness stop somewhere at the mother's uterine wall, and for all the same reasons that I can't force someone else to give me a kidney. I don't have the right to hijack your pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness because I need your body for a certain amount of time. A sloppy yet foundational version of this idea is called the violinist.
So what the 14th Amendment, which was the basis of the opinion, is saying that, yes, here you have the Constitution through the Bill of Rights, which says, or rather through an amendment, it wasn't in the Bill of Rights, but to say you can have a right of privacy, which that word isn't actually there, but it's interpreted as one of the rights that are broadly enumerated in the 14th Amendment. And then from that derivative right to privacy, you then have a further derivative, subderivative right that says that your body and being able, what you are going to do with your body. So,
yes, and that's consistent with something called the principle of entailment, where by accepting scenario A, I then have to accept what is entailed by scenario A. So to be consistent, if I am to accept that women's bodily autonomy is a good thing, I then have to accept by entailment that her right to choose what goes on with her body, regardless of any life form in it, whether that be a human or a tapeworm, is paramount. If Proposition A is bodily autonomy and Scenario B is abortion, claiming that you believe Proposition P would entail that you also have to believe in Scenario B that is entailed by Proposition A. To claim that you do not believe in Scenario B is to be logically inconsistent, and that can be broken down in mathematical logic.
And I think intellectually, like at a very high level, a lot of people wouldn't understand. I mean, there's a lot of libertarian fans of the show who would say your right to privacy allows you to put in your body whatever you want, or to be able to do with your body whatever you want. So it's not like that entire spectrum of argument.
No, and by the way, I think that's a valid argument. I think libertarians who say, not only do I think pot should be legal, but I think someone should be able to shoot heroin in their house if they want to. I think it's very hard to argue against that constitutionally.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard to argue against it logically, since that is part of the principle of entailment. And again, the only time that we make exceptions in these circumstances are when one person's rights to pursuit of happiness infringe on another's. For instance, if someone tries to use bodily autonomy as an anti-vax argument, the proper counter-argument is that a child that could be vaccinated but is not will logically violate, by their destruction of the herd immunity, the ability for anyone who is immunocompromised in their pursuit of life and happiness. I know I didn't necessarily need to make that point, but that point's been brought up a lot since I've been having the abortion debate, so I figured I'd go ahead and throw it in here for future reference.
And
it's a compelling argument.
But the difference becomes when, for example, you have a different heartbeat.
Right.
Yeah, you're hurting
someone else in there, and where you draw a line, again, under the libertarian philosophy, you would draw a line where you're hurting someone else, and those types of things. Yeah. And that's where you even on the question of what you have a right to privacy for, your right to privacy doesn't extend to what you can do to other people.
No, it's a really, really loose knot tied there. And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's likely dead, admitted that Roe v. Wade is a byproduct of, quote, heavy judicial interventionism. That's what she said. Okay, so I want to make sure that people understand.
Her own words.
Yes, and she's dead.
This Weekend at Bernie's all over again.
It's just Weekend at Ginsburg.
Whatever you want.
Part 3.
This is another claim too. This is more so a generalized claim we hear about abortion a lot, but they have been banging on all cylinders when it comes to this one here. So these two laws specifically, that this is about regulating a woman's body. There's no law like this against men.
Democratic woman in the legislature tried to fight back. State Senator Vivian Figures introduced an amendment to make vasectomies a felony, noting that there are no laws regulating what a man can do with his body.
That screech.
Who are you to tell me what to do with my body? It's my decision. It's not yours.
What's the F for? I guess we'll find out.
Wait, hold on a second. Men could have no say, none, in what women do with their bodies? So you want to undo Roe v. Wade? Who was filling the courts, sweetheart?
What's going
on? You want
to
lose the right to vote? Because who gave you that one?
What? So the mere coincidence that it was men in the courts that happened to write these laws means that you can then play the entitled rich boyfriend who gets to claim that sex is owed them because they bought their girlfriend a car? Because that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying that men granted women something that they should have already had in the first place, and that by women speaking up about it, they can just take it away. Just like if a woman were to not give sex to their boyfriend, they could just take the car away. Do you not see how this is an incredibly toxic line of thinking? The right to vote was not a special permission granted to women. The inability to vote was special pleading in the first place. Logical and ethical consistency was established once the right to vote was given. This was not a granted thing. This was something that was revoked from the get-go. Something that should have already been there, but you're arguing about it as if it was a card that was given.
Many of you didn't even want it. You didn't want bucket duty in the draft.
That's true.
By the way, there are plenty of laws like this that apply to men. Here's actually something, let me ask you this. Can you name me, genuinely, a comparable instance where it doesn't? So they compare vasectomy, right, to the heartbeat bill. Vasectomy, it's your appendage. It's your DNA. You can do what you want with your body. Just as, by the way, no one out there cares about you getting your tubes tied.
Actually, they do. I have several female friends who have tried to get their tubes tied, and the argument has always been, what if they want to have children later? And in many cases, unless they are either old enough, already have enough children, or can demonstrate that there's a medical necessity for them getting their tubes tied, they're not allowed to. So you can claim that nobody cares about that, but unfortunately facts don't care about your feelings, and the reality is that a lot of people do. Coupled on to the fact that if you're talking about tube tying, the tubal ligation procedure is, much like the vasectomy procedure, reversible. At least if everything went smoothly during the procedure. But again, the reality is that getting your tubes tied is incredibly difficult. Seriously, if you're 18 and female, try going into a clinic, especially in a primarily red state, and request getting your tubes tied. There's a pretty high likelihood you will not be successful.
No one out there cares about getting a pap smear. This one leftist was tweeting on Twitter like, oh, so now we're gonna have laws about men are gonna decide what we do with our pap smears how often. Well, hold on a second. Why do you think it is that none of us care about any of those things? Because a vasectomy is not ending a heartbeat.
Can we talk about this point now? He's made it several times, and his rhetoric has been pretty consistent, so I figure it warrants response. But can we all agree that a heartbeat is probably the worst method of determining whether or not something is alive? I'm not talking about if your friend drops on the floor and checking their pulse is the first thing you go for. No, I'm talking about from an ethical standpoint. From my point of view, it seems to me that brain activity would be the most consistent method of determining if something is alive in an ethical or moral sense, because it is brain activity that will ultimately determine whether or not something can feel pain. It is brain activity that will determine whether or not they can understand what is happening to them, and it is brain activity that determines whether or not they have memories or even personhood. None of these things are defined by a heartbeat. However, it is a good rhetorical tactic to refer to the heartbeat because we as humans have a very high amount of proclivity to assigning things to the heart that aren't necessarily there. For instance, something like love we view as something from the heart, even though the heart is the last place any of this comes from. It all comes from chemical activity in the brain. Ultimately, all of this is going to end up on the brain, not on the heart. I can keep a heart beating outside of a corpse independent of the body. If I were to insert that heart back into the body, the person would still be dead. Whereas if the brain maintained all of its function and you inserted it into any body, assuming that nothing was rejected, theoretically, the person would still be there. All of their memories, experiences, and everything that makes them, well, them, would be functional. This cannot be said of the heart. So my running theory in all this is that anytime we refer to something about life being tied to the heartbeat here, specifically when dealing with the pro-life versus pro-choice argument, we're dealing with an appeal to emotions, which is another logical fallacy. Because unlike Stevie Boy here, I can name them.
By the way, not yours, another heartbeat. So let me ask you this. If we all acknowledge when we're talking about a heartbeat bill, okay, that you're stopping a heartbeat and it's not the mom's heartbeat, the mom doesn't have two hearts, she's not a medical marvel. At least most of them, right?
Well, I would think
Dr.
so.
Ben Carson isn't having to come in and separate all of them. So my question to you is, if you're ending a heartbeat, whose heartbeat are you ending? Yeah. And can you point me to any instance, any example, where a man can legally stop the heartbeat of another human being, innocent, nonviolent, let's not get into war here,
Of course we don't need to get into war, because getting into war, as I said earlier, would cause you to become very intellectually inconsistent. That whole dying on a hill of dead bodies thing, full disclosure, I actually hadn't watched up to this point in the video before responding to this. I do respond to these things live and then edit them afterwards, so I really had no idea that Steven Crowder was going to sidestep the war issue. Awkward how those predictions work out.
Can you name me any example? More importantly, can you name me one example that would allow men to do that exclusively? Meaning men would be allowed to stop someone else's heartbeat and women wouldn't be. That's the only way that your argument holds water.
And again, no. What you're doing is you're arguing from the improper position here. The actual position here is whether or not the fetus has a right to the woman's body. Can you name me any instance where one human being has legal rights to another human being's body? Especially when we're talking about something like a medical procedure. Can you name me an instance where I, for instance, would be forced to give up my kidney to someone else if, in fact, they would die otherwise, and by giving my kidney to them, we would both then survive the procedure? Under, say, utilitarianism, this holds water, and it means that pro-life, by its very nature, would have to be utilitarian in nature, because the pro-life position of saying that the fetus requires the mother's body, and therefore, for the ultimate good to be achieved, both the fetus and the mother's life should be paramount at the same time, meaning there cannot be a termination of pregnancy, that position is consistent with utilitarianism. However, strangely, it seems to me that in the case of abortion, this is the only time that we appeal to utilitarianism. There's no point in time where I'm forced to give a lung to somebody in the United States. There's no point in time where I'm forced to give a kidney to somebody. Even if, for instance, I had punctured both of their kidneys right now, and therefore I was entirely morally responsible for the state of their kidneys, I still would not be legally responsible for replacing those kidneys. I would go to jail, certainly, but I would not be held legally responsible for the continuation of that other person's life, even though I'm the one that caused them to be there in the first place, much in the same way that the fetus is caused by the mother's actions. Well, the mother and the father's actions, but that's getting into different territory. So again, if you argue from the dishonest position that you are, then you can say that the argument holds no water based on the way you want to frame it. But my point is that the way you're framing it is not the way things function in reality. Framing this as a male versus female issue is less useful than framing this as the rights that the fetus has versus the rights that the mother has issue. The fetus does not have a right to the woman's body, as that right undermines the woman's bodily autonomy. As I mentioned earlier, if you believe in bodily autonomy, then by the principle of entailment, you have to agree that abortion, as an ability of choice, has to be upheld.
Here's something else that I genuinely I'm curious to hear people's opinions on, because I asked my wife this the other night. Women out there, can you think of, I mean, I'm sure women from a long time ago can say, sure, because if I spoke out, my husband gave me a fresh one. I understand that, right? The Wonder Bread era. Let's talk about today. Can you think of any issue today where, as a woman, you are told you're not allowed to have an opinion exclusively because you're a woman?
Yes, actually, on the issue of whether or not they should tie their fallopian tubes, and when they should be allowed to do so, and under what parameters. My partner went to the hospital and tried to get her tubes tied on more than one occasion, and was revoked because, as per the doctor, she may one day want a child, or her partner may one day want a child. And since neither me nor Jeremy want a biological child, and Raz, as her other partner, can't actually produce a child with her, it would then follow that all partners don't want that child, nor do we want one for the future. Yet, her tubes remain untied. I know it's an anecdote, but it's an anecdote I've heard more than once. Sorry, Stevie. Hammers don't care about your feelings, bro.
If we're going to say, oh, if it were vasectomies, men could do it. Well, hold on a second. No, men are not allowed to stop another human being's heartbeat. In any instance, the only people who are allowed to do that are women. It's an exception to the rule. The only exception where it's permissible to end another autonomous being's heartbeat.
Unless we're talking about war? That issue that you said must be set to the side because it would force you to become logically inconsistent. At least you understand that by appealing to the realities of war, you end up getting completely undermined, but it still doesn't avoid the issue. The mere fact that you have enough privilege to be born male and therefore will never have to face the reality of this circumstance doesn't mean that you shouldn't fight for a woman's right to choose.
Is for women. So let me ask you on the flip side, are you ever told as a woman that you cannot hold an opinion, or you are not entitled to an opinion exclusively because you are a woman? Women who are watching, listening, let me know.
I'm not a woman, but again, fallopian tubes.
I can't think of any. They're claiming that these bills would imprison mothers. They won't. These bills are completely unprecedented. They're not. These bills don't take into account the health of the mother. They do.
They don't take into account the mental health of the mother. And the bills themselves may not ever get to imprison a mother because any lawyer worth their salt will know how to fight against it. But as I mentioned earlier, charges, and in some cases incarcerations, due to self-induced abortions are not something that hasn't happened in the past. To argue that they'll never happen in the future, especially when the laws are more restrictive, is a bit naive.
This is the start of overturning Roe v. Wade. Well, not exactly, but potentially that's a conversation we may have. But let me ask you this. What if none of this matters? What if these states, to people here who are upset about these bills, particularly like the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, Kamala Harris, the entire DNC platform, by the way,
of course.
There's no intellectual diversity there at all.
You say as you have your army of sycophants nodding their heads to you.
What if these states, let's say Georgia, Alabama, had passed an abortion bill, that made exceptions for rape and incest and the life of the mother? They already make that exception.
Alabama didn't. Oh, sorry, you were talking.
And they banned abortion at only 12 weeks, requiring a 5-day waiting period. Would liberals support it? Do you think they'd support it then? Or do you think you guys would protest it?
You're about to show a clip about this, but I want to go ahead and head this off at the pass. I personally don't think that a 12-week cutoff is sufficient, mainly because 1 in 400 women end up not realizing that they are with child until about the 5-month or the 20-week mark. And 1 in 2,500 women make it all the way to labor before they even know that they're going to have a baby. This can be due to a variety of factors, including fear, stress, or even some mental issues, which means arguing for the 12-week cutoff can sometimes get you into the spotty area of ableism, which is another awkward place to step. The condition I'm referring to is literally called denied pregnancy, and it happens often enough. It is due to the existence of that condition that I cannot endorse a 12-week waiting period. But let's go ahead and play your clip.
She and her husband did what they thought was best for their baby girl. They got an abortion in the 3rd trimester. Reproductive rights are about health. They are about safety.
This is an existential fight for the right
and liberty
to control your own body.
Abortion cannot just be theoretically legal. It has to be literally accessible.
Yeah, I feel like it's a basic human right that nobody gets to use your body without your consent.
I had an abortion last year.
That's
it
real
was an
funny.
incredibly
What about jamming
positive
forceps in
experience
it?
for me because I didn't want to become a mother.
It is a normal part of women's medical lives. So far, succeeding in limiting our access to exercise our constitutional right.
It's not a constitutional right.
And as I said earlier in the video, it is in fact a constitutional right because it is directly in line with the pursuit of life and happiness, which are part of those, what were they called, inalienable rights? We would almost call them axiomatic.
By the way, these are the same people who don't believe in the constitutional right to keep and bear arms.
Oh look, the tu quoque fallacy. Instead of talking about the actual issue of whether or not the constitutional right for the mother, you then argue about, well, what about this constitutional right? Let it be known here, whataboutism is not a valid response to an argument. So someone says their stance on the rights to bodily autonomy, and you respond with, what about your stance on guns? That has nothing to do with the issue of bodily autonomy.
Which actually is a constitutional right.
It's actually spelled out.
When we're talking about amendments, it's number 2, right next to number 1, which includes, by the way, freedom of speech, which you also don't believe in.
And there it is again.
So you're literally stepping, you've heard of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies? You're stepping over rights to grab ones that don't exist. Like, freedom of speech, let's move that over here, right to bear arms. I don't really like it because David Hogg was in a Michael Moore film. 14th Amendment, right to privacy, therefore you can have an abortion at 32 weeks, says Elizabeth Warren.
No, now you're being incredibly intellectually dishonest. The right to have an abortion does not require the revocation of your right to bear arms or your right to free speech. Those two literally have nothing to do with the topic at hand, so by trying to say that you have to step over those two to get to the one, or that anybody's actively doing that, is, well, let's just go ahead and call it it's stupid.
This one I'm pretty confident on. Oh my gosh. It really is absolutely remarkable to me. And by the way, I want to make sure that I'm clear, that context of the first Elizabeth Warren clip, she was talking about parents who had a late-term abortion because the baby was going to have a congenital, I believe, a heart defect.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be accused of taking her out of context. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter. That's not why she was opposing a 20-week abortion ban. You need to understand this, okay? If they say, well, hold on a second, we need exceptions on this. There's no exception for rape or incest. All right, hold on a second. You're against a 20-week ban. So how about on the flip side? Would you only extend the abortion beyond 20 weeks in cases of rape, incest, or, for example, a congenital heart defect, serious birth defects, the health of the mother? That's not what Elizabeth Warren proposed.
And the reasons why are because we have things like denied pregnancy conditions. It's because there are literally other factors involved here instead of the ones you are listing.
No, not at all.
They don't make those exceptions. You can't have it on one side of the coin and not on the other. It really is remarkable to me. And again, the intellectual consistency.
Yeah.
Who cares? Why should it be rare?
Exactly. You should be able to do
if it doesn't mean anything. And also the fear-mongering that really bothers me. You hear the right accused of fear-mongering quite a bit, where the right fear-mongers, they want it's based on fear. Well, let's be honest. What do conservatives fear-monger on? Okay, terrorism, socialism. You know what? Okay, 9/11, Arab Spring, ISIS. You know what? Socialism, Venezuela. How about instead of fear-mongering, I call that a heads-up.
And what does that have to do with the issue at hand? This doesn't have to be a right versus left issue. This can just be an issue that we all agree on if we agree that bodily autonomy is paramount. You're the one turning this into a right versus left issue. Well, you and Ben Shapiro and others.
Sounding the alarm a little bit for you.
Look at the left's fear-mongering. What is it? Climate change? Polar ice caps were supposed to be gone, by the way. We're supposed to, the entire world was supposed to be in famine aside from North America and parts of Europe.
11 years, 8 months.
Florida's supposed to be gone. No more coral reef, no more fish. Not saying there's no climate change, but the catastrophes certainly haven't happened.
Right.
I mean, we literally blew a hole in the ozone over the North Pole, and then we've slowly been repairing that by no longer using the chemical that was causing it. CFDs were a thing, and they were ours. The mere fact that we haven't fallen into a dystopian post-apocalyptia doesn't change the fact that 97% of scientists agree that climate change is a real and dangerous thing. Well, scientists that are in that field, since they are kind of the ones that matter.
Right.
Abortion. If you ban abortion, you're going to be jailed for miscarrying. So whereas the right fearmongers gives you a heads up based on things that have actually happened and are currently happening across the world, the left fearmongers on things that can't be proven, never happened, and they move on to the next thing. No one in this country has been regularly arrested for having abortions or for miscarrying.
Except they have. I literally mentioned a few of them. So is it only fear-mongering when the thing that you're fear-mongering about doesn't happen? Because the thing that has been mentioned has literally happened. Climate change literally is a thing, and we have found very real effects of it in our world, and the revocation of bodily autonomy and rights to privacy do in fact lead to circumstances that we have seen pan out legally in America several times. So I'm not really sure what you're using as your definition of fear-mongering, and I don't want to try holding you to one because that would be intellectually dishonest.
If you accept that wholesale, you have bought false fear-mongering. It's not even close to the truth, and at least we can correct that. We can get to the conversation of abortion at large.
Whew, and finally we're done. I'll be honest, there are a lot of things that I would personally like to correct Crowder on, but I have no idea if I'm a better orator or rhetorician than he is, so I don't know how I'd stand up in a debate. From all the time that I've studied debates, an interlocutor can come in with nothing but the facts and still lose the debate to somebody who's just spewing bullshit. It all comes down to the tactics of the orator. Though, you know, I wouldn't mind that one day, at least giving it a shot. That all said, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I know that it's a longer one, but I feel like I owe you guys that since I haven't been able to put out the normal amount of videos that I used to do. It's really hard to actually make daily content when you're also driving to and from multiple locations and moving boxes. But hopefully that will all end soon, and I'll be able to get back to daily content. Hopefully you guys found my arguments compelling, and if you did, let me know in the comment section below. Or if you disagree with me, let me know there too. I want to thank you all for your support during this, especially Astral Frontier and Glitch, who are patrons of mine who have been helping a lot during the course of all this. They're not the only ones, but I did feel like name dropping them here. But I'm gonna stop stalling. Subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, share it with your friends who are pro-life, or share the video with your friends who are pro-choice that you think need to refine their arguments, or if you think that they think I might need to refine my arguments. I'm not perfect. And as always, insert end of video tagline here.